Welcome to Alt Swift X's ACOK Abridged, in which we take a delightful romp through the second book in the Song of Ice and Fire series, A Clash of Kings. And today we're discussing Catelyn 1, the first Catelyn chapter. And I'll tell you, these thrones, they just keep on throning, you know? Man, did you see George Martin on the red carpet? He said that, Game of Thrones could go for 11, 12, 13 seasons. He was saying he wants it to never end. But meanwhile, he's putting out all these prequels and preview chapters and all these little bits and pieces instead of actually, continuing his book series with The Winds of Winter. But you didn't come here for complaints about our beloved George. You want some hard-hitting literary analysis, right? You want some succinct, to the point analysis of A Clash of Kings. And this chapter, Catelyn 1, it's a relatively long one. So I think we'll have to be concise this time. We'll have to be lean. We'll have to cut away the chaff and the fat, and we'll have to, really just stay on point. And that's why I'd like to start this episode with an anecdote about a hermit crab. So a good friend of mine told me this story that they heard from their grandmother. Told them this story, and basically, it's a story about the kingdom of the hermit crabs, about the monarchy of the crustaceans. Crustaceans are all monarchists, by the way, you might be aware. And this particular line of hermit crabs have been ruling over this great undersea valley, this fertile plain where the hermit crabs would frolic by day and nestle in their little shells by night. And the king of this hermit crab establishment, his name was Jemima, and he had this wondrous throne, this ancient throne that was carved by the claws of the finest hermit crab artisans in all the realm. And this was just shaped like this glorious, just swirling fractal abstractions upon which the hermit crab king would plant his red buttocks and dole out justice upon his land. And despite the glory and the beauty of this ancient throne, the King Jemima was not satisfied with his throne. He felt that as a monarch of a so ancient and storied a lineage, he should have a far more grandiose throne, one that would really just cup his buttocks in the most just regal way possible. Like he just wanted his buttocks massaged and just held on like a plinth, just in the best possible way. So hello to Thomas from his roommate. Sorry for having this inflicted on you. And so the hermit crab was like, we got to get a bigger throne. We got to get something better. I want something gilded. I want something inlaid with jade. I want it to be rolled in gold. I want it to be ephemeral with emeralds. I want it to swirl with pearls. I want it to get groovy with rubies. I want it to... I can't think of any more. What rhymes with amethyst? Anyway, so they're like, let's get another throne. And so all the kingdom went out to design a new glorious throne for King Jemima, and they eventually came up with this truly gorgeous piece that was made of fused sand. They made these forges in the Hermit Kingdom and melted this sand and fused the sand together into a shape of a beautiful throne. And you would have no idea how hard it is to run a forge underwater. Real pain in the ass. I don't know why Asia in the chat is saying Reagan smash, but I approve of that message. And so the king got this glorious new throne, and he was like, great, this is great. But the next week, he's like, you know what? This decadent, beautiful throne, it's not good enough. I want another throne. And so all the people of the kingdom went out and got an even more ridiculously luxurious, grandiose throne. And this time it was made of winning lottery tickets, just only winning lottery tickets, in like Super Lotto. Nothing worth less than 100 grand was in this pile of like origami throne. Like all these tickets were folded and shaped masterfully into this just buttocks cushioning throne, and and it was great. And then he held on that, and so just it happened over and over. This king just beggared the realm by asking for more and more great thrones. And eventually his whole throne room became like quite literally just a room for the storage of thrones. The king himself could barely fit in his throne room. He'd have to crawl over all these giant thrones in order. And so eventually, his advisor came up to King Jemima. King Jemima's advisor came up and said, "Are you satisfied with this throne?" And the king said, "You know what? Yes, I am finally satisfied with my throne. That particular one was made of the frozen tears of the lobster queen." And he said, "Look, this is a perfect throne. I'm totally happy with it." And the advisor's like, "Well, you know what? You got nothing to do now because the realm's gone. Like in your ceaseless, unquenchable desire to get the perfect throne as the Hermit King, you've just systematically just beggared and obliterated, and like that there's no one in the kingdom now. You are now a king who rules over thrones. You are so obsessed with kinging that all you can be king of is just a bunch of thrones. That's meta, isn't it?" And then the king was like, "Well, at least I can rule over you, Jemima's advisor." And then the advisor said, "I was actually you, Tyler Durden style, the entire time." And then just reality just ate itself out of existence. Amazing. So with that prelude, I think we've gotten rid of anyone who might have been expecting serious literary analysis. And with that, let's do some serious literary analysis, starting with the first line of Catelyn 1. Welcome all. I hope you're sitting comfortably in your seats. I hope you're ready for an exciting episode of Old Swift X's A Clash of Bridged. The first line is, "Her son's crown was fresh from the forge, and it seemed to Catelyn Stark that the weight of it pressed heavy on Rob's head." So I love the smell of a freshly forged crown. I think there's nothing like it. I think they should put it in like those little you can get those little air freshener pellets where you can get your house to smell like freshly mown grass or baby's ass or like whatever, like, or, freshly baked lasagna. I think fresh forged crown would be great. But the weight of this crown presses heavy on Rob's head. And that basically is Rob's arc in a sentence, I think. It is about the weight of responsibility and the way that it changes Rob and the way Rob struggles to live up to the pressures of being a king. His transformation into Rob the Lord. And Catelyn Stark is, of course, observing this and concerned about this. And we have a description of the crown. This crown is newly made, but it's made in imitation of a much older crown, an ancient crown of the kings of winter. And the reason they can't use that particular heirloom is that it was taken by Aegon the Conqueror, Aegon Targaryen, who forged Westeros from the Seven Kingdoms 300 years ago, because Torrhen Stark was the king of the North at the time, and he was like, do I want to, A, fight the guy with all the dragons, or B, give up my crown, or C, go back to the Westchester and have a nice frothy Guinness. And he chose options B and C. He gave up his crown And he said, "Yo, Aegon, take my crown." And I wonder what Aegon did with it. Catelyn wonders, what did Aegon do with the old crown of the Kings of Winter when Torrhen Stark submitted to the Conqueror? No man knows, apparently. But Aegon must have done something. Aegon had multiple crowns given up to him. Did he collect them? Did he chain them together into a tube that a puppy dog could run through? Did he just wear them in like a stack of crowns, just waving about on his head? Did he get like wear it as like an armband, maybe, if you're like really ripped? A lot of options. Paperweight seems to be the consensus in the chat. But Stephanie Morris suggests playing horseshoes with the crown. That would be dope. There's a long storied tradition of throwing circular objects onto pegs, actually. It's called pegging. Don't Google that. And so they discuss the crown of Torrhen Stark, and this new crown has been made in imitation. So it's made of hammered bronze, and it's got iron spikes wrought in the shape of longswords. It's also got the runes of the First Men engraved onto it. You all know the story of Odin and the runes, right? The Norse god Odin hung himself from a tree for 9 days as a sacrifice to make himself worthy of the great gift of runes, of knowledge. It's maybe like some kind of a similarity to like the whole biblical thing of like Jesus. Well, that's different. But like you know how like Adam and Eve like took from the apple of the tree of knowledge. I wonder if the runes are sort of analogous to that biblical fruit of knowledge and the idea of needing to sacrifice for knowledge, and the way that knowledge changes you. Actually, no, it's probably wasn't it that Odin gave up his eye to get the runes? I don't remember the specifics. This was a long time ago, and I wasn't there. I only heard about it secondhand. But the point is that this crown has runes. It's got swords, and bronze and iron, we are told, are the very metals of winter, dark and strong to fight against the cold. So you got to wonder, what's the relationship with the Long Night? Like, how long ago was this crown forged? What was Stark Dominion established after the Long Night and the formation of the Night's Watch? Fighting against the cold, is that reminiscent of that? What do those runes say, I wonder? Actually, come to think of it, like, does this new throne have runes inscribed on it like the old throne? And if so, what do those runes say? Like, presumably no one remembers what the original crown said on its runes. Does anyone even know how to interpret or translate the runes of the First Men? I don't know if anyone does. Stephanie asks if the Children of the Forest might have forged the crown. I doubt it, because they didn't work metal, but I wonder how they might have been involved in that time and the establishment of the ancient Stark lineage. Supposedly one of the Game of Thrones prequel shows that is starting up soon is about this ancient time, around the Age of Heroes and the end of the Long Night, or the start of the Long Night. I wonder if we might learn more about the ancient Starks from all this. So while we were streaming this episode, we encountered some technical difficulties. The live stream connection, the internet pipeline kept leaking and dropping out until it finally failed entirely, which I believe is what's called breaking the internet. Kim Kardashian did it once, and now we too have that honor of having collapsed the internet beneath the weight of our Game of Thrones commentary. That I assume is what happened. That or the hermit crab story is what did it. So now we are recording offline, without the benefit of our live studio audience, without the benefit of the stream of memes that gets posted in the live chat. We're doing this the old-fashioned ways. The ways this was done on the Swift of Law. We recorded offline and then we uploaded, and you'd only get to hear hours after the actual event, which is terribly distressing. Because if it's not all immediate, did it even happen at all? It's outdated. I don't want the Swift to get old and wrinkled. But don't worry, we're going to finish this chapter of Catelyn 1, A Clash of Kings. In the previous bit, we managed to get halfway through the first page. I think we'll perhaps speed things up a little bit, because we've got some politics to discuss. So what's happening is that Robb Stark, King in the North, is holding court, as kings do. And the weight of his crown is holding down the auburn mop of his hair. I wish my hair was a mop. It's so convenient for cleaning and such. And Catelyn Stark, our POV character, is overlooking. Robb is sitting with a sword over his knees. Because at the end of the day, political power, it all comes from force, right? Who said that power flows from the barrel of a gun? That's how things work at the end of the day. Even if you go to, like, seats of power today, parliaments and such, they've got, fellows with guns standing outside a lot of the time, if not fellows with very large, tall, black British hats, which themselves could probably be used as mops, couldn't they? It's all about cleaning products on the head, I think, ultimately. But let's hurry up. So Robb Stark's sitting. He's got a sword. Second page, and he's speaking to Cleos Frey. Now, Cleos Frey is described as stringy and weak and thin, which seems to be the Frey look. His eyes are pale and watery, and he cannot seem to stop blinking. He seems a bit nervous, which he probably would be when the Wolf King is threatening you from his throne, having dragged you out of his dungeons. And Cleos Frey, you'll recall, is who goes south later on with Jaime Lannister and Brienne, and Cleos dies ignominiously when he's dragged upon the ground by a horse and bashes his head on the ground. I like to think that Cleos actually miraculously survived, having a vestigial brain inside his torso as a backup for the one that was broken in his skull. And Cleos continues to this day riding across the Riverlands, just slaying dragons and rescuing fair maidens and just having all sorts of adventures with Hot Pie. I hope that's what's happening, but hey, maybe not. Robb says, "Rise, Sir Cleos," and Robb's voice is not as icy as his father's would have been, as Ned would have been. Ned was renowned for his icy, minty, fresh breath. This episode sponsored by Colgate, Listerine, Exxon, Windex. But war has made Robb a man before his time. So Robb is explicitly being judged against the example of his father. Robb is trying to live up to the leadership, to the leader that his father was. Legacy is a shadow over this arc. And one of the many things that's making Cleos Frey anxious is Greywind, the great direwolf of Robb Stark, who is lean and smoke-dark with eyes like molten gold. And every man in the hall can smell the scent of fear of Cleos Frey. Because apparently in the Whispering Wood, at the Battle of the Whispering Wood, where Cleos had been captured, Greywind had ripped out the throats of half a dozen men. Which is not something they included with the show. It would have been cool to see the dire wolves kicking some ass, but I suppose the CGI is expensive. In fact, they didn't show the Battle of the Whispering Wood at all in the show. They just showed its aftermath, because, extras are expensive, and so are throats. Throats are difficult to replace. All the plumbing is quite complicated, all the membranes and tubes. It's like the internet. Startlingly similar. Anyway, so Rob's holding court, and Lord Umber, the Great John, is there, ever the loudest of Rob's northern bannermen. The Great John was pretty cool in the show. I thought he was well played. Although he could have been bigger, greater, seeing as he's meant to be a giant of a man, but whatever. And Cleos is cowardly, and the reason why Cleos has been brought out of the dungeons is because Robb wants Cleos to bring a message to Cersei Lannister in King's Landing, who is presumed to be in control of the Iron Throne, what with young Joffleberry Sauce spreading his buttocks across the throne seat like jam. And so the message that they're sending is going to be explained shortly. It's an offer of peace. Robb is offering to end this war that has been raging between the Starks and the Lannisters. And when Robb says that this is an offer of peace, Lord Rickard Karstark shoves out of the hall and leaves. He shoots, eats, and leaves, Lord Karstark does, because he wants no peace with the Lannisters. The Lannisters killed some of Karstark's sons. Jaime Lannister killed some of Karstark's sons in the Whispering Wood, and he doesn't want to end this war. He wants to kill more bleeding Lannisters. So this is a problem for Robb, because Robb is a new king. He's been newly crowned. He's young, he's inexperienced, and he needs the support of his bannermen if he is to continue to be a political leader. He needs the support of his senators, the support of his power brokers, the support of his bros in the frosty north. So there's a conflict and a tension here. There are many conflicts and tensions in this chapter. So Karstark leaves, and then Robb starts explaining the terms of his peace agreement. It's a list of demands, a shopping list. You ever hear the Partridge in a Pear Tree Christmas Carol? It's like one of those. The first thing that he's demanding is the release of Sansa and Arya Stark. Robb wants them delivered by the Lannisters to the north safely. And in return, Robb is offering to release Cersei's cousins, Willem Lannister, a bunch of Lannisters and assorted phrase. Like a bag of peanut M&Ms will be delivered to King's Landing or wherever else they desire. And Catelyn, meanwhile, is watching the faces of all of the Northern Lords who are listening in, because, of course, their reactions are very important to Robb's political security and power. Second, Robb demands the bones of Ned Stark, because they belong, besides his brother and sister, Brandon and Lyanna, in the crypts of Winterfell. And that's actually a mystery that is still yet to be resolved, because the bones of Eddard Stark get sent north with Hallis Mullen in the books, but Hallis Mullen has not been seen since. And Barbary Dustin has said in Book 5 that she will not allow Ned's bones to return to Winterfell because of some dispute about her husband who died at the Tower of Joy or some such. Barbary Dustin's an interesting character, but Ned's bones are a bit of a mystery. Perhaps they will turn up again. And Catelyn, Ned's wife, thinks that living men had gone south and cold bones would return. And Catelyn feels guilt, because it was Catelyn who told Ned to go south with King Robert in the first place. My doing, Catelyn thinks. Mine, no other. She is stewing in her guilt, marinating. This is a high-pressure recipe for guilty fish, is what Catelyn's mind crucible is smelling like right now, and the odor is pungent. And the third condition that Robb demands is Ned Stark's greatsword, Ice. You'll note that the term greatsword is used in Game of Thrones to describe very big two-handed swords. which is different terminology to what's common in real-world history. Apparently, in real-world history, a longsword is the word used to describe those giant two-handed swords. And meanwhile, the smaller sword, the one-handed sword that people are most familiar with, is called an arming sword in the real world, apparently, while a bastard sword is somewhere in between. And that's why on a certain other YouTube channel I heard about once, there's this video about Valyrian swords, and every day there's a comment posted on that video saying, "Oh, you said that bastard swords are longer than long swords, but long swords are longer than bastard swords," because it's different in Game of Thrones than it is in the real world, but that's irrelevant. So Robb wants ice back, and of course he never gets ice back. Ice gets melted down into Widow's Wail and Oathkeeper. And of course, we also know that Sansa and Arya haven't returned to Winterfell either. So of these three demands, none have occurred thus far in the story. Fourth, Lord Tywin Lannister must release the captive knights and lords that were taken in the Green Fork, the battle on the Green Fork. And once that's done, Robb says he will release all the Lannister prisoners except for Jaime, who will remain Robb's hostage to ensure Tywin's good behavior. And that probably is the only thing that could compel Tywin Lannister to behave. I don't think Tywin cares very much about a bunch of Lannister knights and cousins, but Jaime Lannister, his golden son, the one he wants to carry on his legacy and rule, Tywin does not fuck about with Jaime, which is why Robb loses such an advantage when Catelyn later releases Jaime. But that happens later. Meanwhile, Catelyn studies the sly smile of Theon Greyjoy. Theon always has a way of looking like he knows some secret jest that only he is privy to. That secret smile reminds me of Alaras in the Citadel, whose secret is that she is actually Sorella Sand. But Theon Greyjoy's sly smile is not really something that they included in the show, is it? Theon in the show, I think, looks much like what he is, which is a very sort of uncomfortable and frustrated and lost and lonely young man. He looks pained much of the time, I think. Whereas in the books he has this persona as a sort of a smarmy pretty boy, which I suppose is like a defense that he puts up to protect his vulnerabilities, like Tyrion, and the Hound put up these fake personalities. But Theon doesn't really do that in the show. But the final demand is the biggie in Robb's wish list, in his Amazon wish list, in his letter to Santa, aka Cersei. His last demand is that the Lannisters and King Joffrey must renounce all claims to dominion over the North. The North will become a free and independent kingdom as of old. Our domain will include all the Stark lands and the Riverlands, bounded by the Golden Tooth to the west and the Mountains of the Moon to the east. You'll note that Robb says "as of old." He's referring to historical precedent. He's invoking ancient precedent because, of course, if you want to convince someone that a certain way of doing things is legit and correct, the best way is to say, well, they did it 1,000 years ago, so it must be a good idea. One time, a distant cousin of mine beat a man to death with a rock tied to the end of a stick, and he said, Your Honor, officer, this is how they did it in the old days, and that's how they should do it now. The point I'm making is that maybe things that have happened for a long time are actually not necessarily the things that should continue to happen, but that's just a suggestion. You can use that in your own life. If you've been... Look, put it this way. If you've been eating tangerine yogurt on your toast every morning since 1998, maybe you should try apricot, Just try it. See what happens. But, I suppose, to be fair, matters of politics and war are rather different, aren't they? Because you can't easily just try something new without it dramatically affecting the lives of millions. Robb couldn't very well stand up and say, how about we give everything north of the neck the Jogos Nye and their sources in the east, and everything south of the neck, we will distribute by lottery to either all of the people of odd-numbered age and all. We're rambling, but the point is that Rob wants the independence of the North. It's a Brexit. It's a Brexit. He wants a Northxit. A Northxit is what he wants. The King in the North, shouts Great John Umber, and he has a bit of a chant. Great John Umber, I think, would make a great cheerleader. He basically is he's a literal cheerleader, is Great John Umber, and I'm sure he'd look great in a skirt. So Rob makes all of these demands, and he puts them on paper and hands them to Cleos Frey, and sends him off to demand peace with the Lannisters, which, spoiler, he doesn't get. And everyone shouts King in the North some more, and Grey Wind howls, because Grey Wind also wants to be a cheerleader. There's a definitely like a fanfic here. That I think would be great. Some kind of like a modern day high school drama about the Stark lords competing to be cheerleaders, and all sorts of hijinks happens. I think that would be great. But Robin Ryger is also looking after Cleos Frey, and Robin Ryger is of course one of the people who ends up getting sent from Riverrun to the Wall to check out Jon Snow, which some people think might be part of the Great Northern Conspiracy, but that's another subject. So that all happens, and then Catelyn and Robb leave the Great Hall. So that bit of political pantomime has finished, and now Robb and Catelyn are speaking honestly to one another. Catelyn describes the business as the wolf as japery, more befitting a boy than a king. So constantly we've got judgment here of how is Robb behaving as a politician, as a king, as a boy, as a man. What's his identity? How's he playing this? And Catelyn was like, well, and Catelyn says that, yeah, it's a problem that Lord Karstark has walked out. They need the support of those lords. Of course, in the end, Karstark gets frustrated and kills a bunch of Lannister prisoners, and then Robb kills Lord Karstark, which is a massive problem for his support from his bannermen, and that's all of a thing. And Catelyn talks about stuff, and Catelyn is frustrated that Edmure Tully, her brother, has taken the lords of the Riverland, has let the River Lords go off and defend their lands in the Riverland rather than remain a part of Robb's army. Good guy Edmure is very concerned about his common folk. It's one of his redeeming features, but it's also one of his worst qualities because it undermines Robb's power as a military leader and contributes to their loss of the war. But that's what he does. He takes all the River Lords off to defend the Riverlands instead of hanging out with Robb's army. And they talk about Karstark, and Catelyn complains that more bloodshed will not bring Eddard back. It will not bring Rickard Karstark back. So Catelyn's saying, there's no point continuing this war. We've got to bring peace. It'll only bring more death, and that's a problem. Robb is a youth of 15, and he's growing a beard to try and be more kingly, but he still looks like half a boy. And Robb wants vengeance no less than Karstark does. Catelyn had to convince Robb in order to make this peace offering. So Catelyn is one of Robb's major influences and advisors, because he is, after all, Robb's mother. She is Robb's mother. And if you're not going to listen to your mother for tactical battle advice, then what's the point? Go and call your mum and ask her for battle advice tonight, please. It's important. Call your mum. And Cersei will never consent to trade Arya and Sansa for a pair of cousins, Catelyn says. And Robb's like, well, I can't release the Kingslayer. So Catelyn wants Robb to trade Jaime Lannister for Sansa and Arya. But Robb feels he can't release Jaime because his Lord's Bannermen, like Lord Karstark, would be really fucking mad if they let Jaime go, which indeed they are when Catelyn does let Jaime go. And Catelyn is like, well, if you do lose all the support of your Lord's Bannermen, and if you do lose your crown, that would be worth it if we can get Sansa and Arya back. So Catelyn here is weighing the lives of Sansa and Arya as more valuable than Robb's entire kingdom, which is an understandable sentiment. I mean, what the fuck's a kingdom and a crown and a piece of paper compared to the people you love? But at the same time, that kingdom is made up of people who need, protection, and supposedly you're helping with that by being their king. And I don't know. I guess my point is that Catelyn doesn't care very much about the individuals who aren't close to her, but I suppose that's called being a human. Anyway, so Catelyn is frustrated by Robb's refusal to offer Jaime in return for Catelyn and in return for Sansa and Arya, and they get a bit heated, and Greywind growls as he senses Robb's anger because, of course, the direwolves have a psychic connection with the Starks. And Robb complains about Edmure, poor Edmure, who had only meant to support him. And Robb ultimately says that, Jaime Lannister's just too important. I might have been able to trade Jaime for Ned Stark, my father, if he was still alive, but he's dead now. And then Catelyn says, well, hang on, so you'd be willing to trade Jaime for Ned Stark, but you wouldn't be willing to trade Jaime for Sansa and Arya? And what she's pointing out here is that this is a patriarchal, unfair society where women are very clearly and distinctly less valued as human beings than men are. And then immediately after saying that, Catelyn thinks, oh, that was unworthy of me. Robb's only doing his best. She feels guilty for pointing out the patriarchy. The patriarchy is like this elephant in the room that you can't point at or acknowledge. It's like Voldemort. You can't acknowledge it, otherwise, shit, everyone will realize that it's like the Emperor's new clothes. You just got to pretend that it doesn't exist, guys, and then it's almost as good as if it doesn't exist, unless you got a uterus. But that's a whole other topic. Catelyn has some feels about Ned, the rock that her life was built on, and she thinks that she could not bear to lose the girls, Sansa and Arya, as well. Next page. Robb says that he'll do all he can for Sansa and Arya, and then he changes the subjects, and he tries to convince Catelyn to go to the Twins or somewhere, because Catelyn thinks, he wants me gone. Kings are not supposed to have mothers. Robb would feel better about being a king if his mother wasn't hovering over his shoulder. And I suppose he also wants her safe. It's also a legitimate concern that you probably don't want your mum in the line of fire during a battle. And then Robb mentions that he's sending Theon to the Iron Islands to try and get the support of the Greyjoys and the Ironborn in Robb's war, which is one of Robb's big cock-ups, because of course Theon and the Ironborn end up attacking the North instead of joining them. And Catelyn advises Robb against this, begs him to send anyone other than Theon to the Iron Islands, because she doesn't trust Balon and the Greyjoys. And it also is pretty dumb to just immediately give up Theon to Balon when Theon came to the Starks as a hostage, and he remains valuable as a hostage. If you're just immediately giving him up to Balon, you're losing a negotiation chip. As terribly dehumanizing as that is for Theon, but welcome to the horrors of being Theon Greyjoy, which we'll have to make a video about sometime. Anyway, so after Robb weds himself to that particular cock-up of giving away Theon, they talk about Theon, and then Robb just sort of walks away in a huff. Doesn't listen to his mother. And Catelyn can only watch him go. her son, and her king. How queer that feels. So, and she considers that, it was on... Catelyn advised Robb to command like a king, and here Robb is commanding her like a king. Her advice has bounced back into her face. That's the weird thing about kids. You want them to be strong and independent and stand up for themselves, but you don't want them standing up for themselves against you. There's an implied exception there. Come on, mate. And they talk about Edmure. Because Catelyn now wants to go and visit her father, Hoster Tully, who is dying. And Edmure refuses to come with Catelyn, because Edmure would sooner face battle than the sick room, Catelyn thinks. Edmure doesn't quite seem capable of facing his dying father. On the way to Hoster, Catelyn passes through the Godswood in Riverrun, because there is a Godswood of the old gods in most of these old castles. And autumn has come, winter is coming, the spectre of winter looms, and even the wisest man never knows whether his next harvest would be the last. And this is not just talking about seasons, this is talking about Hoster Tully, because Hoster Tully might die at any moment. He never knows whether his next harvest will be his last. So this is a meditation on time and death and passage and seasons and cycles and generations and all of that good stuff. Hoster Tully lies abed, his hair and beard as white as his featherbed, his once portly frame turned small and frail by the death that grows within him. And the Blackfish is there, Brynden Tully. And he's not afraid of a sickbed. He's a man who faces his issues, I think, one way or another. And his boots are dusty and splattered with dried mud, because the Blackfish doesn't seem to care much about appearance. He seems a pragmatic, direct, honest man with integrity, seems the Blackfish. He's no bullshit, which is why he made such a great counterpoint to Jaime in Season 6 of Game of Thrones. Whereas Jaime is all gilded, Blackfish is happy to be splattered with mud. And so... the Blackfish is tall and lean and grey and precise, his clean-shaven face lined and wind-burnt. And they discuss Hoster's condition. He's taking milk of the poppy for the pain, he sleeps most of the time, he eats too little, he is dying. So this is sort of representing not only the death of Hoster, not only the death of a generation, but perhaps the death of summer. At the same time that we have Hoster and the summer in decline, we have the rise of a new young hero, Robb, and the rise of the winter. And in his death fugue, Hoster talks about regrets and unfinished tasks and people long dead and times long past. Which reminds me of the slow death of Aemon Targaryen. He talks about his regrets and unfinished tasks, including the whole business of the Azor Ahai prophecy with Rhaegar. There are multiple old men who die in this series who share certain common themes. And I suppose one of the regrets that Hoster has, which is mentioned later on at some point, I think, is the issue of his daughter Lysa Tully, Catelyn's sister, who, word is, once got pregnant by Littlefinger, and Hoster forced Lysa to have an abortion with moon tea that she didn't want to have. Tansy is, I think, the term for that tea, which Hoster repeats during his death. So Hoster seems haunted by his past. They say that the way to have a good death is to be satisfied with your past, to have peace with your past, and Hoster is not fully at peace with his past. The Blackfish is at the bedside, and he's had many quarrels with Hoster. Word is that Blackfish is gay, and he never married for that reason, which was a political issue for the Tullys. It's important for them to marry. And that was a long-standing, deep, angry argument between Blackfish and Hoster. But despite their quarrels, there is a deep bond between Hoster and Blackfish. The character of Blackfish, I think, is similar to Benjen, someone who is, sort of a mentor figure and has integrity and is honest and capable, but who is also a sort of an exile in a sense and is an outsider and a black sheep, and who has secrets. I think Benjen is similar there. And so the stone balcony of Riverrun is shaped like the prow of a ship. They talk about the red comet, the red messenger, but what, Catelyn asks, is the message? That's the difficulty of prophecy. And the comet looks like a long scratch across the face of God, which I suppose must mean that God has a blue face, big, broad blue face, just leering down at us all the time. Oh, I'm God. Hey, look at me. I've got one eye. I've got one eye called the sun and one eye called the moon, and I rotate. That's what God says. And people have all these different interpretations of what the red comet means. Is it a flag of vengeance for Ned? Is it Lannister crimson? Or is it blood smeared across the sky? And Catelyn asks, our blood or theirs? Which I think kind of sums up Song of Ice and Fire. Well, no, even more so when the Blackfish says, was there ever a war where only one side bled? Which is the point of Game of Thrones. Starks bleed, Lannisters bleed, they all suffer alike in all their own complex ways, which I think is one of the great humanizing and thought-provoking messages of A Song of Ice and Fire. They mention that the Riverruns are awash in blood and flame. Beric Dondarrion is raiding the Raiders, which is quite meta of him. Beric Dondarrion, of course, gets resurrected a bunch of times. And someone says they slew Dondarrion, but he came back again. He's becoming a ghost in the Riverlands, who's adopting mythic status. A little bit like Nymeria and the Direwolves, who we get these sightings of, and the Corsair King and the Krakens. There are lots of these little mysterious figures that just appear as a rumor throughout the series that we never quite see doing much yet. Well, I guess we see Dondarrion. Anyway, so and so of Beric Dondarrion, Catelyn says, "May the gods preserve him," and that they do. The Red God R'hllor preserves Thoros, for better or worse, and indeed later preserves Catelyn herself, for better or worse. In the rare times that the gods do as people request, it is usually in the most horrific way imaginable in this story. So the father's bannerman, blah blah. It's folly that the Riverlander forces are splitting off. Darry men recaptured their keep, but then they got destroyed by Gregor Clegane. Basically, the Riverlands are a giant fucking clusterfuck. It's just a disaster. And Darry, of course, by the way, ends up getting taken over by Lancel Lannister. He gets given that as his seat later on by the Lannisters, but he gives it up to go and join the Faith, the Faith militant. So Darry has a funny history. Darry was where the Baratheons and Starks and Lannisters stopped off on their way south in the first book, which is where Arya and Nymeria had that tussle with Joffrey. Darry comes up a bunch of times. So Darry is last of his line, and yeah, that's why Lancel ends up getting taken over. And the Blackfish mentions that the head of Gregor Clegane would make a noble gift for all the people of the realm. And of course, in a later book, in Feast, Cersei gifts the head, or the purported skull, of Gregor Clegane to Dorne. So this whole page is just frothing with foreshadowing. The whole series is just constantly telling you what's going to happen next in all these little subtle allusions and hints. But Catelyn says, "Don't speak to me of heads, Brynden, because Cersei Lannister has mounted my husband Ned's head on a spike." And it is hard for Catelyn to believe that he is truly gone. Clegane, it gets referred to as Lord Tywin Lannister's cat's paw, which is rather a dainty sort of a description of such a mountainous man as Gregor, but whatever. And Catelyn considers Tywin the true danger. He's currently safe behind the walls of Harrenhal, which we later witness through Arya. And she mentions Armory Lorch, who ends up attacking Arya's party, and she mentions a sellsword out of Qohor, who turns out to be Vargo Hoat, the mad Kahoric, the goat. And these raiders and awful people are raping and mutilating and butchering across the Riverlands. But Blackfish figures that Tywin is using terror as a tool to try and provoke the Starks into battle. And Catelyn worries that Robb will give him his wish. And everyone's very excited about Robb, the other Stark bannerman. They see him as Aegon the Conqueror reborn. And Catelyn is worried that will lead Robb into walking into Tywin's trap. The Blackfish says that, well, he shouldn't, because the first rule of war is not to give the enemy his wish. I'm pretty sure the actual first rule of war is sticking with the pointy end. But don't give the enemy his wish is it's probably top 10, I suppose, isn't it? We get told the story of Harrenhal, which I'm sure you all know. Harren was built by King Harren the Black, who was an Ironborn tyrant who took over the Riverlands, and he built this giant castle, and thousands of people died working to build this monstrously large castle. A castle that has weirwoods as beams and rafters, which undoubtedly gives Harrenhal some sort of magic property, I suspect. But on the very day that the castle was finally complete and Harren took up residence, Aegon the Conqueror burned the shit out of him. Which, probably didn't actually happen on the same day. That was probably smoothed over for the sake of the story, but hey, when has factual accuracy ever been relevant? This is fiction within fiction. Fuck it. And yeah, the whole point is that, dragons fly, and they can destroy Harrenhal. And Catelyn would rather not. Robb has to fight a battle near Harrenhal, which he doesn't in the end. And Staffon Lannister is out there, another nephew of this damnably large and fertile house that is House Lannister. Stafford ends up getting killed. But there's still time before this war has to go further. Hey, maybe this peace agreement will be taken up. Yeah, no, it doesn't. But Catelyn and Blackfish come up with another plan. Instead of Robb having to face Lannister alone, they decide to try to enlist the help of King Renly. Renly Baratheon, the brother of dead King Robert, is trying to crown himself and raise his own political bloc off with the Tyrells out in the east of Westeros. And the Starks figure, hey, let's make friends. Although, of course, we know that fails because Renly is a bit too busy getting stabbed by a shadow with the face of his other brother, Stannis Baratheon. And hey, that's just Game of Thrones, isn't it, really? And how will we convince Renly to come to our side? Well, we will give him what kings always want. Homage. Homage. I don't know how to pronounce it, but kings want it. So that was Catelyn 1, A Clash of Kings, the first chapter in A Clash of Kings from the Catelyn POV. I hope you enjoyed. Thank you for listening. For a little while, we were doing some other shenanigans on this channel. Horoscopes was something that we were doing, sort of improvised, strange, silly stories. If you would like to hear more of those, there is now another separate channel to contain and quarantine that madness. We try to keep the sea urchin stories contained to that sort of channel. So Random Article is the name of the channel, and you can click on the link in the description to get to that place if you'd like to hear some odd things. But otherwise, thank you for listening. We will do some more episodes of ACOK Abridged in the future. When, how, wherefore, whence, I don't know. But it'll happen. Cheers.